Hello, I'm Amanda Taylor, and this is My First Name is Agent, a regular report of my journey to watch all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This show was previously a podcast, so some of you might already be listeners, but if you're new here, this is how it works. I watch Marvel stuff, I write an essay, and I give you my opinions. All of the available episodes are linked below if you want more, and this episode goes out to Zara, who specifically requested it. Hi, Zara. So we've entered into Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is, in itself, an incredibly remarkable feat. From a business perspective, there is nothing to be said except for a big wow for the incredibly big teams creating these movies and TV shows. So thank you for that, creative people. But you knew there was a but coming. I am in a Marvel slump. Sometimes the sheer volume of it all just gets to me, and I find myself less excited by each release. It's hard to stay at an 11 all the time about a franchise that kind of doesn't know when to take a breather. And honestly, I'm not really impressed by the last 3 things they've released anyway. From the perspective of a fan, but also a screenwriter and an entertainment journalist who thinks pretty deeply about this stuff, I have to say, I am disappointed. Phase 4 comes on the heels of an incredibly bold move to make a superhero team that didn't actually team up fully for 10 years. It was very fresh and fun, and Phase 3 especially had some real bangers like Thor Ragnarok that absolutely changed up the expectations for not only his movies, but the whole franchise. Then we started Phase 4 with Spider-Man Far From Home, which I absolutely hated. You can hear my thoughts on that in the podcast. I hated it for a lot of reasons, but one being that they have never let Spider-Man be the star of his own movies. They're always hanging on to his connection with Tony Stark / Iron Man, even after his tragic death. I love WandaVision, which for personal reasons, aka I cannot talk about it for long without crying, I will not be doing a formal episode about. I do not think these problems apply as much to that show, though it is not exempt. I just can't critique it. I have a favorite child, so see? I suffer from fandom blindness too. However, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier came out right after WandaVision, and I was on a high. I was like, wow, okay, these TV shows are going to be top-tier quality events with huge budgets and brilliant teams. Whoopsie. Falcon and the Winter Soldier was a mess. For a TV show that at its core had the purpose of rehabilitating one character and making another comfortable in their new role, it had unreasonably high stakes. Because of course WandaVision could be a small personal story about one woman, but God forbid we do that with a man, so they had to deal with the horribly named Flag Smashers and their plot to take over the world or something. I am not being flippant. I literally can't remember, because ultimately what I found wrong with this show was that it was incredibly forgettable. Week to week, I wasn't speculating or excited for new episodes, and I mostly watched it out of obligation, which sucked. The best performances in the show came from Sebastian Stan, who was doing the most as Bucky Barnes 4 or maybe 5.0, and truly working toward reconciling his past with the man he wanted to be, and Wyatt Russell as new Captain America. Unfortunately, both of those stories were and should have been secondary to what the show was trying to do, I think, in terms of a conversation about race via Sam Wilson's new role as Captain America. If you're into comic book shows as a whole, you've probably watched Watchmen. It is the gold standard of telling a race story inside a comic book world, and also outside of one. It's just that good. And when I was watching Sam become a backseat afterthought in his own show, I thought, they should have gotten Jeff and Damon, because I'm on a first name basis with those guys that I've met once each. That writer's room was packed with writers of color, which is important, but also it was led by people who had skill and legacy. This show was created and guided by Malcolm Spellman, which will make you go, who? Because his credits include this show, a few episodes of Empire, and virtually nothing else. More about this problem later, but yikes. The ineptitude and inexperience of the team resulted in a show where the stakes made no sense, the limit of people's powers were unclear, and the things that should have had meaning became tokenistic. Sam's family having a financial struggle on the sidelines was bizarre and unnecessary. It would have worked if they had made it about that, about Sam's home life, his backstory, and made it a centerpiece of the story about being Black in America. It would have made his big speech at the end of the show pack more of a punch and be way less cheesy. A show trying to address PTSD, racism, whatever the Flag Smashers were doing with housing and income equality, and keeping with the tone of a Marvel property, is doing too much. In the hands of someone who was more capable and experienced, it would have honed in, gotten more stylish, just done a better job, but what we got was bleh. Loki and Black Widow came out almost simultaneously, which is terrifying. There will come a time when there are no gaps between Marvel shows and movies, and it takes over all of our lives and consciousnesses and money, but the discussion on capitalism and consumerism and fandom is for another day. I disliked Loki so much. I found every episode dull and uninspired. I really think it could have been a made-for-TV movie instead of a 6-episode series. The dialogue was atrocious, which is especially insulting when you have this great Shakespeare actor who loves language. And the chemistry between the two leads was non-existent. I mean, he never has good chemistry with his female co-stars. Honestly, my very favorite part of the show was when Kang yelled at Sylvie to grow up. Because seriously, bleh, she is like 40 if the actress's age is to be our guide, and pretty one note as a person. One interesting thing that came from this show was the confirmation of a queer character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I loved that so much. And the design and the concept of the TVA was really creative. The art department was clearly going nuts on this show, with so many fun sets and so many fun costumes, although not really for Loki. Don't misunderstand. I am a huge fan of Loki as a character. In my previous Marvel video, I even talked about how I got to interview Tom Hiddleston and he was such a delight. But he is a villain and a supporting character, and he is designed that way on purpose and has always been used very well in that capacity. I love his journey and that he's changed and grown and learned, but this show portrayed Avengers Loki, 2012 Loki, vengeful and hurt and broken Loki, having that same journey in about 5 days. That sucks. So of course I looked up the writer and creator of Loki as well. His name is Michael Waldron. He is a man whose previous writing credits include 1 episode of Rick and Morty and nothing else. His next 2 projects, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness and an untitled Star Wars film. I mean, seriously. How are these people getting these shows? And can I also follow that tradition? Okay, so Black Widow. Too little, too late. For a movie that exists neither by necessity in storytelling or franchise potential, it is very weird that it even came about. The consolation prize of giving Natasha Romanoff a send-off after we watched her die in Endgame is more insulting than I think any of us are willing to admit. Because we're like, oh, we'll take the female superhero content we are given. But you guys... Things in this movie that ruled. Florence Pugh, jokes made by Florence Pugh's character Yelena, the intro song, the hairstyles, the amount of jewelry they wore while fighting, although I argue that many piercings are a huge liability and ponytails are easy to pull. Buns, my ladies, buns, or Yelena's Dutch braids. But that's my whole list. A lot has been said about Kate Shortland's directing, but nothing that I really agree with. I found it pretty average. And the screenplay they were working with was also kind of meh as well. Not to mention, it was written by a man. Eric Pearson has worked on far more than the previous 2 writers I mentioned, including Agent Carter, which is great. But the movie still didn't quite hit right, and that's probably because not being a girl makes it hard to write a super girl power movie. Marvel couldn't drum up one woman to pen this screenplay. I am devastated about this. I wanted to like this movie so bad, but it suffered from so many problems, like my personal dislike of Scarlett Johansson, who is a conventional hottie that constantly says shitty stuff that no one holds her accountable for. Also, like the fact that the character has been mistreated by the writing for so many years that I literally don't know if this performance felt true to Natasha or just like ScarJo herself. Also, one of the big climactic fight scenes being that Nat was forced to destroy like an army of literally brainwashed women. Was I supposed to be rooting for her as she like demolished all these victims, though they knew not what they did? It was a genuinely weird moment. I'm also sad that everyone is acting like the vest, you know the one, was something they planned in advance, not a clever way to make this movie exist inside the universe, even though it clearly never did. Natasha never talks about her family because they were a retcon for a movie that was long overdue and deeply undercooked. It was like a pat on the head. There, we gave your human non-powered sidekick girl a movie after sexualizing and underwriting her for a decade. Gee, thanks. At least we know that the new Black Widow won't be taking the same amount of shit. These handoffs are a comic book staple. A few heroes who get replaced and replaced and replaced. But there are also about 1,000 other characters they could start to use instead of gender bending. Like, why not just give us new characters who were already women? I don't think anyone really cared about Iron Man in 2010, but look at us now. They can use the power of good storytelling and perfect casting, just like they always have, to introduce the general public to a whole slew of new characters. All of these projects could have offered more. A Black Captain America is a goldmine for writing potential. Loki came out as bisexual, but then nothing happened with that information. Black Widow's skin-deep feminism could have gone far more in depth, but we got these symbols only, and bad stories. And for real, the setup is so obvious in all of them. We haven't had as many standalone movies that relied so heavily on the fact that they are part of a whole in the previous Marvel phases, because it was kind of a gamble they were making that people would follow along that closely to the story. Now they're a little high on their own supply and they're weaving tiny bits of information into everything, but failing to make them stand alone as pieces of good, popular art. For some more perspective, I'll summarize with a few sentences from EW fanboy and critic Darren Franich. Yes, this is from an actual magazine, and I will link the whole article below. Phase 3 overturned monuments before it was a mainstream mood. Is fabulous success spoiling Marvel towards self-fandom? Or was Phase 3 always a con? Thor lost his hammer, his eye, and his brother. Now the hammer is back, his new eye is cybernetic, and his brother lives on Disney+. Guardians 2, Ragnarok, and Black Panther promised a bold new direction. Maybe it was just a blip. I will still tune in. I will head to theaters on a timely and regular basis. I'll still feel a thrill when I hear the Marvel theme music. I'll get excited over new suits and incredibly intricate fight scenes. I'm a forever fan, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to love everything they make. I'm hoping to get back to fangirling and freaking out over Phase 4 and these shows and movies, but until next time, I'm Amanda Taylor. This is My First Name is Agent, and you're watching Apple Juice. Not anymore because I'm turning it off.